In this session, we're going to talk about Valentinus, who grows up in Egypt, essentially, but causes some horrific problems for Rome and for Christianity. It was labeled him here as a mutilator of Scripture, and we'll get into why as we progress, because maybe not technically what he was, but he caused disruption, and so we'll talk about the reasons why. But nevertheless, he was from a town called Taita, I believe, or modern day Taita in Egypt, and somewhere around the 120s, 130s, he moves to Alexandria. And while he's in Alexandria, he converts to Christianity. And he has a teacher there that will come up in another session. His name is Basilides. Basilides was a Gnostic teacher, and so Valentinus learned from him, we suppose. However, later on, he makes the claim that he learned from one of Paul the Apostle's disciples, someone named Theudas, who claimed to show him the truth about what Paul believed, about his ministry, about what Jesus actually came to do, interpretation of Scripture, etc. And he became a student of his as well. Nevertheless, sometime in the 130s, he moves to Rome because he has already, again, converted to Christianity. He's become a teacher, in a sense, in his own right. And he arrives in Rome approximately the same time that Marcion does. And so there's already a bit of unrest and confusion. Valentinus, as well as Marcion, are sort of competing for the job of bishop. So they arrive at about the time that the previous bishop of Rome had died. At least that's the understanding that we have. And Marcion, as we said before, gave the Roman Church 200,000 sesterces. And whatever happened with that, we're not sure. They later gave it back. But Valentinus, we assume, was going to be appointed bishop, and then that fell through. It fell through likely because of his teachings, especially these Gnostic tendencies that he had. In fact, they weren't just tendencies. They had sort of infiltrated in every way, the way that he looked at Scripture, the way that he taught theology. But the reason that he gets to the position to be considered at all was supposedly because of how great of a speaker he was. He was a great speaker, he was a great teacher, people generally liked him. And so he fit into the social strata within Rome without a problem. And he was the guy that would say hello to you walking down the street, and the one I hope he's giving a speech today. He was that guy, except what he was espousing was Gnosticism, that apparently he had learned from Basilides and possibly Theudas, but that's doubtful. And he was at some point rejected for the office of bishop. And when that happened, apparently he started his own school because it seemed that he wanted to use the position of bishop to teach to a wider community. And so if that didn't work out going that route, so he went a different route and started his own school and gained quite a number of followers, it seems. And it's likely during this time that he composes what's known as the Gospel of Truth. Now, this isn't known with certainty. However, it does seem as if he is the author of what's known as the Gospel of Truth, which is a Gnostic writing. And the Church Fathers, Tertullian and Irenaeus, are writing against Valentinus because of his teachings. They don't comply or they don't match up with Orthodox Christianity. And there's they name a document in there, and saying this gospel that he created, this gospel of Valentinus, and Irenaeus identifies that with the gospel of truth. And there were a number of passages that are quoted, not only from those two, but from a variety of other people and other sources. But there wasn't a lot to go on with whether or not he actually had this document or what this document actually was for a very long time. So modern scholars, for instance, were trying to rebuild it in some way. But in 1945, there was an important find made known as the Nag Hammadi Library. And in that library was one document called the Gospel of Truth, and so named because of the first several words of that particular writing. And when you hear the word gospel, a lot of times today people are thinking that it's this narrative about Jesus, but that's not really what the word gospel means anyway. Gospel means good news, and it seems that Valentinus meant it, with that intent, that there's the good news of the truth is what he was presenting. Now, the irony of that is that, at the same time, there are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of whoever, and now we have the Gospel of Truth, this other writing that was also created. And he's doing this in parallel to the teachings of Orthodox Christians in Rome. And what it appears is happening in Rome at that time is that the Valentinians, which they come to be known as, which are the followers of Valentinus, are attending churches that are Orthodox. Now, they may have their own meetings also, but there seemed to be sort of a mixed crowd of people who were Orthodox Christians and people who were Gnostic Christians who were attending churches that were run by Orthodox bishops, priests, etc. It doesn't seem that he wanted to be necessarily hostile to Orthodox Christianity. He believed that he had some deeper meaning, and therein lies the issue here. It wasn't so much that Valentinus altered the scriptures physically, but what he did do was create a system of thought wherein people could alter it spiritually. They could alter it in a different way. Essentially, they were changing the hermeneutic in the way that you decided what something meant and what it didn't mean. Basically, allegorical approach to the way of interpretation of Scripture. Now, at the same time, there are Orthodox preachers and teachers who are interpreting it in the same way. They are also using allegory to interpret Scripture, but they're doing it in a way that remains in this sort of Orthodox channel, or at least mostly. Now, Valentinus doesn't do that. He's coming at it from a completely different point of view. He is getting his information from Basilides, if you remember, who's getting his from sort of classic Gnosticism. And the idea is that there's the pleroma and the kenoma, right? The pleroma meaning the ideal, as Plato would have said, the out there somewhere, the reality in the heavens, and then the copies are the replication of those things that are upon the earth, that are sort of cheap replications of reality. That's the kenoma, that's the physical world. And the escape that you would get through Gnosticism isn't salvation in the same way that Christianity understood it. Not in the way that Jesus, died for sins and offered grace. He didn't see it that way. What he saw was that the real salvation was knowledge. That's the intent of understanding, what Gnostic means, right? It means gnosis means knowledge. And so gaining that knowledge actually saved you from the physical world. And because what really needs to happen is to put everything back in the way that it was originally intended. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail of all of his cosmology because it's quite detailed and it's well worked out, and there's a lot going on there. In fact, it looks something like a family tree, or family god tree from the pagan world at the same time, with various higher level gods giving birth to or emanating lower level gods and eventually man. And that's sort of the structure that he has. And he has this sort of original primal force named Bythos. And Bythos emanates from himself 30 aeons, and these aeons are grouped into 15 syzygies. And these, I know that's maybe confusing, but these 15 syzygies are simply sexual pairs. So there are 15 sexual pairs making up 30 eons. And two of them in particular for him are the ones that cause the issue. One of these is Sophia, which, the Greek word there means wisdom, and the other is Sakla. And Sakla is the demiurge, right? So there's an error by Sophia, wisdom, and then the demiurge, Sakla, out of ignorance, creates the world. And that's where we are. And so we have to get freed from that. And the reason that we know we can get freed from that is because Jesus came as the Christ who was present in the world in order to give the gnosis, to give the knowledge that we needed to escape this physical world so that we might know the truth about the way that the universe actually works. That was the basis of his system of thought. Also, like all Gnostics, Valentinus rejected the idea that Jesus had a physical body, at least in the understanding that we have of what it means to have a physical material body. Jesus is not really the one who suffered. He didn't suffer, couldn't suffer because he didn't really have a real body. He was a docetist, which is common in the early church and many of the heresies, right? Basically, all of the Gnostics were docetic. So much so was this belief utilized in the interpretation of Scripture. What's stated is that Simon of Cyrene, who was the fella in the Gospels who is told to carry Jesus' cross the rest of the way up the hill because Jesus was so badly beaten and hurt, right? That he is actually the one that is crucified in reality, that Jesus sort of does this change up and he made Simon look like him and he looked like Simon so that it would crucify someone else. And in fact, he even states that Jesus is sort of standing off to the side, laughing at all of them as the crucifixion is taking place because they think they got him, or something like that. They also had a fascination with the book of Genesis, specifically the creation account. In fact, some of the other Gnostics that come after him create a number of different books that are related to Cain and Abel. Some of them have wild views on Adam and Eve, a number of different things. But one of the things that stand out in just about all of them is that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is depicted not as this great sin, but the opposite. It is the thing that they needed to do. It was this freedom. They found the actual knowledge, the thing that we all needed to find so that we could understand the way that the world really works. And so getting the fruit from the tree and taking that bite was in fact part of Gnostic theology. That was a part and parcel with what it meant to pursue Gnostic Christianity. So these kind of views were widespread. In fact, the Valentinians spread all the way through just about all of the Roman Empire, from North Africa all the way around through Mesopotamia and all the way wrapped around into Italy. So completely around the Mediterranean Sea, there were Valentinians. And even after there were Orthodox theologians and Orthodox speakers who were calling them out and saying that they were heretics and that they shouldn't be there, nevertheless, for 300 years, they essentially remain a part of the Roman Empire in some way or another, spread out all throughout the empire. As an aside here, I do think that the heretics from this particular time period are the ones that sort of set up the reason why the Orthodox Church moved away from allegorical interpretation. It wasn't that they thought that they were doing it wrong, it's that they thought the others were whenever they were interpreting it allegorically, finding some spiritual meaning, because there are lots of the church fathers who would say, well, this is the meaning, Seth walked from here to here, but also there's a deeper spiritual meaning that's included in the text, right? Well, for many of the Gnostics, it wasn't just that. There may be 3 or 4 layers of allegorizing to get finally to this kernel of truth that we were supposed to find all along. So you may have an allegory of an allegory of an allegory. That's an interpretation of the text of Scripture. And this system of thought was problematic for Christianity for quite a while. And in fact, I think a lot of it leads to the problems that have to be addressed in the Council of Nicaea and the councils that follow over the next, say, couple hundred years, at least through the 6th century, could probably trace their roots back to this time period when there were so many Gnostics present, and the allegorical interpretation method was being used. You could essentially create whatever theology you wanted. And that was not, I think, what Valentinus intended. He intended it to be pointed in a particular direction, but nevertheless, people grabbed onto it and they did whatever they wanted. And in that way, they mutilated the text. There was no longer any concern about author's intent or why is Paul writing to this particular place. It was about finding these deeper spiritual meanings and brushing aside any surface level meanings at all. It was just a digging in. And in fact, if you read the Gospel of Truth, which is widely available online for free in a number of different places, translated by a number of different people, if you read it, you begin to get the understanding that I'm talking about here, because Valentinus is looking at spiritualizing absolutely everything in just about every way. And that's the legacy that he leaves behind. He leaves behind sort of a confused mass of people who call themselves Christians. And in fact, all the way in the year 190, there was a particular pope who has a presbyter that works for him, a deacon, essentially an elder in the church, and he's a Valentinian. So, this is so predominant in the area that they're even having to accept some of these people as part of the leadership. Or does that say something about that particular leader, Pope Victor? Was he partial to the Valentinians? We're not sure. But it does give an example, at least that episode, an example that there were Valentinians mixed in with the Orthodox believers in their churches. And that's how Valentinus mutilated Scripture. Join me next time as we look at Basilides.